Who knows what an ELE is? There we go. Extinction level event. Hollywood likes to make movies about this every few years. A number of years back, I think it was 96, we had a couple the same summer that were the same type of ELE movie. I'm going to show you the trailer to one of these two movies. You may have seen it.
Are we on? Are we on?
We're on, Mr. President.
A few minutes ago, the United States ambassadors to every country in the world told the leaders of those nations what I'm about to tell you. The comets are still headed for Earth. Now, we've been planning for the worst, so I hope you'll bear with me and listen to what I have to say. To ensure the continuation of our way of life, we've been preparing a network of immense caves, and we can put 1 million people in them, underground, for 2 years. On August 10th, we're going to hold a national lottery. A computer will randomly select 800,000 Americans to join the 200,000 scientists, teachers, soldiers, and artists who have already been chosen. In addition, the United States and Russia have been building the largest spaceship ever constructed to stop the comets. We will prevail. Life will go on.
You may have seen that movie. It was kind of an extreme type situation, but those kinds of movies, or even just thinking about this idea that there could be something like this that could take place, we're thinking of something that would completely change everything, right? Some event that would mark a definite before and after. The whole world would never be the same after an event like this, right? That's kind of what the author of Hebrews is trying to say about Jesus. We've been in our series here in the book of Hebrews, and I really do think if you wanted to subtitle the book, Jesus is Better is what I would subtitle this book. And we've been working our way through a whole series of comparisons, how Jesus is superior to the angels, how he's superior to Moses, how he's superior to the entire Levitical priesthood. And we're in that final section of comparisons where we're looking at how Jesus brings a covenant that is superior to the best covenant the world had before he came, the covenant of the law of Moses. So I've titled today's message, The Consummation of the Ages, and I actually just lifted that phrase straight up from the text we're going to be looking at today. So please turn in your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 9. We're going to be looking at verses 16 through 28, and I think in these few verses we can see a number of things about the consummation of the ages. The first is that the consummation of the ages required a death to enact a covenant. The author of Hebrews here uses a word that in Greek has two very distinct meanings. In our language, we don't have one word that covers both of these meanings. Diatheke means either covenant, in the sense of an agreement between two parties, a binding agreement between two parties, but it's also the word that you would use to describe a last will and testament. So I've translated this for the sake of the argument being made, the sense of the word that would correspond in English to what he's saying. But just know that when you read in this will, it's the same word that you're going to read covenant. And that's how he builds this comparison between the Old and New Covenant and the idea of how wills work, how a last will and testament is set up and enacted. So he says, for where there is a will, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will is enacted at the point of death, given that it is never enforced so long as the one who made it lives. So he begins by saying this about this word, covenant, which also means will in Greek. When you're dealing with a will, so long as the person who made the will is alive, it doesn't go into force. It's just a piece of paper. It really doesn't affect anything at that point. You do not do anything with that until the person who made the will dies. And that's just the point of comparison he's going to make here. That in order for a will to be enacted, someone has to die. Thus, not even the first covenant or will was inaugurated without blood. So now he's going back to talk about this other will, this other covenant, the covenant of the law that Israel made with Moses. Please advance. For after Moses had spoken every commandment to all the people according to the law, taking the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, he sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded you." So he reviews something that we find in Exodus, and has kind of put together, I think, different pieces from Leviticus and Numbers, and kind of lumped it all together into one description of the overall shape of things in the Old Covenant. And some of this, he might even have access to some rabbinic traditions that we're not completely aware of. So if you are trying to track down exactly all of these details, some of the things he mentions we don't find in the Exodus passage. The idea of scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkling the book of the law itself with blood. Now we do definitely, the point he's making, I think, holds very clearly, even if these details don't quite match up, because the first covenant was inaugurated with blood. It was kicked off with the first Passover, when they were slaves in Egypt, and God said, "I'm going to break you free from here, and you're going to be my people, and I'm going to be your God." When that first happened, God set up this Passover and said, you need to sacrifice an animal and put the blood on your doorposts, and the angel of death will come into Egypt, and he will pass over your doors, and no one will die in that household. So the first covenant was very clearly inaugurated with the shedding of life, with the shedding of blood and death at the very opening of it. But the event he's describing in Exodus is when Moses is telling the people the whole law, and the people say, "We will keep the law." And in that moment, he does sacrifice animals, and he does sprinkle the people with the blood, and tells them, "This is the blood of the covenant." So this first covenant was very much inaugurated with blood. Please advance. And indeed, he likewise sprinkled the tabernacle and all the objects of the ministry with the blood. In fact, almost everything is purified with blood according to the law, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. I think that's a very fair statement to be said about the law of Moses. There were multiple sacrifices, and even for voluntary peace offerings, even for Thanksgiving offerings, shedding blood was a part of many of them, although you could have grain offerings. But anything that had to do with forgiveness, there had to be a death. There had to be an animal who was sacrificed. And the point is made over and over in the law of Moses that the life of the animal is in the blood. Therefore, by shedding the blood, what we're talking about is not life, but actually death. There could be no forgiveness unless there was a death. Now, under the first covenant, it was the death of these animals that extended forgiveness of offenses against the structure of laws in the old covenant. So we're talking in this passage, though, about a new covenant. We're talking in this passage about a moment that has arrived in human history that the author of Hebrews is going to describe as the consummation of the ages. All of human history, all of creation's history has been pointing to this moment we're talking about. And the first thing I want us to realize about this important moment in the history of creation itself is that it required a death for God to enact a covenant that was going to change things at this moment. Please advance. Thank you. This consummation of the ages also demanded a superior death. So we've looked at the old covenant and how the blood of animals was what was used to cover offenses under the old covenant. But he says, thus the prototypes of the heavenly things had to be purified with these. We've talked about that word, prototypes. It's the idea of one thing that is connected to another, but it isn't actually substantially that other thing. But there's a definite connection between the two. The way a blueprint is connected to the building you finally build. We're sitting here in this building, but in the office we have some blueprints that came first and that kind of laid out a pattern of the reality we are experiencing here today. In the same way, the first covenant laid out a pattern for a higher, superior reality yet to come. So he says the prototypes of these heavenly things, and in the mind of the author of Hebrews, we have this earthly realm in which human beings put things together with their hands, and we build things here and do things and operate in this realm. But there is a heavenly realm that is beyond our access. There is a realm that I would just call heaven with a capital H. This realm is where God alone abides in perfect holiness and where His will is perfectly done. And I think throughout the New Testament that is the idea. Even Jesus in the Lord's Prayer talks about God's will being done on earth as it is now in heaven, right? So he says there's this heavenly reality that the whole law and the covenant of Moses was just a prototype for. It pointed to these things. So when you're dealing with the prototypes, with the sketches, with the blueprints, these objects had to be purified with these. And he's talking about the sacrifices of goats and calves. But the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. The blood of animals would do for the first covenant, for the things on earth that it was addressing. But there's a superior plane of reality that demanded something better. In the real realm of the heavenly realities, you needed a better sacrifice than an animal. For Christ has not entered into holy places fashioned by hand, copies of the true places, but into heaven itself, now to appear before God's presence for us. This consummation of the ages involves a covenant that has to be established through death, but the death demanded to establish this covenant had to be superior. It had to be better. And animals were good enough for the things that the law dealt with. And we've talked about this. The law did not talk about eternal life. The law did not talk about eradicating sin from creation. The law did not address the real profound needs of creation. But it pointed to a moment in which God would address those things. And for these symbols, for these earthly realities, the law had ways to address them, but it really was incapable of addressing the more profound needs that creation and humanity had. Christ hasn't entered into that kind of a temple that we know of. Jesus never stepped into the holy place in the temple in Jerusalem. I would be very surprised if he ever did. He was not a Levite. He would not have been allowed into the holy place. And the author of Hebrews admits that. No, that's not where Jesus went to minister. He didn't go into some man-made building. He didn't go into something built with human hands. He went to heaven itself. That place none of us has access to. The very presence of God Almighty. He went to the highest place, the highest plane of existence you could hope to aspire to. And there is addressing the reality of our existence in the highest possible realm and level you could think of. He went not to these earthly copies, not to these earthly prototypes, but went into heaven itself. And I don't know who all may have followed the Sunday school lesson this morning, but it covered the ascension of Christ. his returning to the right hand of the Father. He's talking about this. Please advance the slide. The consummation of the ages was the moment sin was removed. And you might have been wondering, I'm talking about all that was necessary for this consummation of the ages to take place, but what actually did God do? If this is the peak of existence for all of creation, if this is the culminating moment in the existence of the universe, what is it that happened at that moment? Not so that he could offer himself up repeatedly, just as the high priest enters into the holy places annually with blood not his own. So he says he didn't go into heaven itself so that he could, and he's already told us that the sacrifice he offered was himself. He gave his life. He shed his blood. He was the death that sealed this new covenant, this superior death, this superior blood that was necessary, the only perfect human being to ever live, the only sinless man, and he willingly gave his life. That was the necessary payment to enact this new covenant. So he didn't do it the way the first covenant worked, where the high priest goes into the holy places every year, year after year, and brings in this blood that's not his own blood. It's some new animal that's been sacrificed that year. And every year there's a new blood to bring in, and there's a new animal to sacrifice, and a continual process of bringing these sacrifices into the holy places. He says that's not what Jesus did. Or he would have had to suffer repeatedly from the foundation of the world. The author of Hebrews is saying if that's the way sin had to be dealt with, if it had to be dealt with piecemeal, where every time a sin happens, somebody has to die to cover it, then Jesus would have had to die over and over and over again from the foundation of the world. He would have had to offer himself up over and over, millions, billions, trillions. I can't think of the number of necessary times he would have had to do this to cover all our sin. He says that's not how it worked. It wasn't like the first covenant where there's this constant repetition and this constant admittance in the very structure of the first covenant that sin has not been eradicated. Sin has not been dealt with because we're still dealing with it day after day after day, and we're still putting up these things that symbolize the idea of atonement for sin. But obviously it's not been taken care of because we still have to keep sacrificing animals over and over and over again. He says Christ put an end to that. He doesn't sacrifice himself over and over and over again. And I'm sorry, but this is a point of theology where I differ strongly with my Catholic brethren. I don't think when we celebrate the Lord's Supper that Christ is redoing his sacrifice all over again. I think the Bible is very clear. It was a one-time thing. We don't do it all over again every time. But now, once for all. One death for all sin, for all time. At the time of the consummation of the ages, he has been revealed to remove sin through his sacrifice. So what happens at this moment, the consummation of the ages? This is the climax of the story of creation. What happens at that moment? What happens is Christ willingly gives his life, willingly dies, and provides the payment that finally defeats sin and death. He breaks the back of death. He breaks the power of sin over creation. And through his sacrifice, sin is done. Sin is done. Not he's still working on it. No, sin is finished. One death took care of it for all time. Please advance the slide. The consummation of the ages will bring rescue to all who believe. And just as it is a certainty that men will die once but face judgment after this, so he's making a comparison. This is the human condition. We all die once, and after that, we answer to our Creator who gave us life. After we die, we answer to our Creator for what we have done with the gift of life He entrusted to us. That is our lot. Every one of us, that's what we all face, right? So he says, well, let's compare that to what Christ has done at this moment of the consummation of the ages. So also Christ, having been offered once to assume the sins of many, so his death isn't just a death. It's a death that takes on the sins of many. And I think the reason the author of Hebrews doesn't say it takes on the sins of everyone is that you have to trust in Jesus for his sacrifice to actually rescue you from your sins. He doesn't force anybody to be freed from sin. If you don't want to, you can stay there. He's not going to make you. But by the same token, his sufficient sacrifice has dealt definitively with all the problem of sin so that anybody is perfectly free to avail himself of what Christ has done and be rescued from that and have their sins forgiven or assumed by him on the cross. So having been offered once to assume the sins of many, he died kind of like us, although very much not like us, right? Our death doesn't make anybody's life better, but his death assumes the sins of many. He will be seen a second time, quite apart from sin, by those awaiting in him for salvation. So he's coming back, but he's not coming back to deal with sin. He already did that. He's coming back to deliver the fullness of what he's promised to those who are waiting for him. I wonder sometimes, given that we're in that in-between life where really sin has been finished. We're already 2,000 years past that moment. Sin has been ended, defeated, broken. Its stranglehold on creation has been shattered. But we are not yet at that moment we eagerly await, where we receive the fullness of the salvation we have been promised, where we are rescued forever from any presence of sin or death in creation. We're still in the in-between time, and I think sometimes maybe we fail to recognize the earth-shattering significance of what Christ did when he came. We say, well, sin's still a problem. It is. I deal with it daily. It's a reality in my life. I am fully aware of the many ways in which I fall short, in which I don't measure up to what even my own conscience would demand of me. Does that mean then that Christ hasn't dealt definitively with things? No, not at all. The issue is sealed. When Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to the disciples, he said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. We're not waiting for Jesus to fight out some big battle and win stuff. It's done. The battle was fought on Calvary. And the victory happened. I want to ask you, can you sense the earth-shattering implications of what Jesus accomplished? Do you realize that the world we live in today is not the world you would have lived in had you lived 3,000 years ago? There was a moment in the history of creation when sin and death and entropy ceased to be the governing forces of reality. 3,000 years ago, if you had lived, you would have lived a very fearful existence. Study your history books. It was a brutal world. And today, 2,000 years after Jesus, when we find out that a policeman executes somebody unjustly, we are appalled. 3,000 years ago, you wouldn't bat an eye at that. Today, somebody shoots policemen at a protest or a demonstration, and we are shocked. 3,000 years ago, that would be the daily living. And you would live in very real fear of people coming in and killing you and taking your wife and children and everything you own. That was the reality 3,000 years ago. But you see, 2,000 years ago, something changed in creation. Life became the infecting agent. Light became the contaminant. Look at Jesus' ministry. Isn't this the way it always worked? Things that would have made him unclean, like a leper touching him, or a woman with a flow of blood touching him, or a demoniac touching him, would have supposedly, under the old understanding of things, made Jesus unclean, would have contaminated him. Everybody that touched Jesus was infected with his own purity. Everybody that touched Jesus was infected with life and light and grace and truth. We live on the other side of the consummation of the ages. The world is not the same place it was before. We owe that to Christ and to his invasion of this fallen, broken, shattered world to bring light and life. Those who trust in him, those who eagerly await on him for that day, that glorious day of salvation, get to begin to enjoy what we will have for eternity. We get to begin to enjoy what we're going to enjoy forever together. We were singing about that day, how marvelous, how glorious it will be. Do you realize that we've already started to do what we were singing about? We're doing it now. We're enjoying the joys of heaven now. We are enjoying the light and the truth and the grace that has broken into our lives now. And all that remains for us is to live lives where we are ever focused on Christ, where his light is allowed into every dark corner and recess of our hearts and lives, to free us from lies, from deception, from darkness, from entropy and death and despair and hopelessness. We don't have to live that way because we have the tremendous pleasure, the tremendous privilege of living on the other side of that day, the consummation of the ages. We're going to sing a song of invitation. I want to ask you today to think a moment about your life. Are you still trapped under the cruel thumb of sin and death? Is entropy the governing principle of your life? Is, when you look ahead, is the snuffing out of all hope in life all you see ahead of you? You don't have to live that way. Christ came and shattered the hold of sin and death over this creation. If you will trust him, if you will turn to him and cling to him and let him rescue you from the power of sin and death, he will begin the process. He will infect your heart with life and light and truth and grace. And you will become an agent of eternity as your life begins to show life and light and grace to those around you. I want to ask you to have the courage today to admit that you're broken and to come before Christ and say, I want you, and I want you to save me, and I want everything you came to bring us. I want to avail myself of what you accomplished at the consummation of the ages. I want to be on the winning side of this. If that's you today, I want to ask you to come forward while we sing. Please stand. Steve and Patty, could you help me with the invitation? And David and Kim, Skaggs, please come over.